Ask most people today about the First Crusade, and you'll hear a familiar story. Greedy European lords launching an unprovoked invasion into the Middle East, driven by a thirst for blood, land, and proto-colonialism. Yet the primary medieval texts and 19th century historians reveal a different set of motivations. The original Crusaders explicitly claimed they marched out of self-defense, driven by a biblical mandate to love their fellow man. To the modern ear, the idea of a holy war serving as an act of love creates a massive historical contradiction. It seems impossible to reconcile the two. Resolving that contradiction requires looking away from the year 1095 and rewinding exactly 40 years prior to a largely forgotten era of intense violence. The First Crusade arrived as a desperate, delayed reaction to a geopolitical collapse that was already raging across the East. This map shows the rapid, sprawling expansion of the newly formed Seljuk Empire. The ruling Arab Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad had begun importing Turkish slave soldiers, who eventually Islamized, usurped political power, and pushed north and west into Byzantine territory. Between 1050 and 1090, the Seljuks poured into Armenia and eastern Anatolia. Contemporary records document the slaughter of tens of thousands of Greek and Armenian Christians. The extreme violence peaked in Ani, the capital of Armenia, which was known as the City of 1,001 Churches. Invading forces systematically and ritually burned down every single church. The conquest was deeply ideological. The Seljuks tore down the massive crucifixes from the grandest cathedrals and shipped them back to Baghdad to serve as religious war trophies for the caliph. Primary historical sources detail a targeted, jihadist-driven eradication of Eastern Christianity that went far beyond any standard tribal Berber skirmishing. Further south in the Holy Land, the Seljuks overtook ancient travel routes, transforming historically difficult Christian pilgrimages into systematically lethal traps for Europeans. In 1065, attackers ambushed a large group of German pilgrims, leading to a scandal of gang assaults, mass murder, and severe extortion. Attackers also actively desecrated physical holy sites. Records describe invaders dragging Christians into churches to be disemboweled, with their blood smeared across the altars as a form of mockery. The military breaking point arrived in 1071 at the Battle of Manzikert. The Roman emperor gathered a massive Byzantine defensive army to stop the ongoing incursions, but the Seljuks utterly crushed them. That devastating defeat resulted in the total conquest of all Asia Minor. This was the ancient heartland of early Christianity, the region where St. Paul wrote the majority of his letters. With the peninsula overrun, a deep strategic panic set in. The Seljuks had reached the very walls of Constantinople, positioning themselves to breach the European mainland. The massive geographical buffer zone that had protected Western Europe for centuries vanished almost overnight, leaving the East on the brink of total annihilation. Facing absolute desperation, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios sent urgent messages to his former rivals in Western Europe, begging for immediate military aid. That plea culminated at the Council of Clermont in November 1095. Pope Urban II publicly recounted the previous 40 years of atrocities, the rapes, the desecrations, and the lost lands, to a massive European audience. To understand the response, we must look at St. Augustine's just war theology, which governed medieval morality regarding violence. According to this doctrine, violence was only morally permissible if it was strictly defensive, reclaimed stolen land, and protected the innocent from immediate harm. Applying this to the year 1095, the Crusaders viewed the rescue of Eastern believers as a direct expression of the command to love one's neighbor as oneself. In their eyes, protecting fellow Christians from the atrocities of the previous 40 years made military intervention a moral obligation born of that love. Viewed through the lens of this 40-year provocation, the First Crusade becomes a desperate, reactionary defense mechanism triggered by a collapsing world. Evaluating these events without that context is historical malpractice.